Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. We are in season 8 and we are in our first episode of the season. I am really happy to have with me Hannah Kirk, who is a content strategy expert helping businesses deliver exceptional digital content experiences. Hannah has built a career transforming content infrastructure for startups. She has deep expertise in technical writing and content management, and she specializes in implementing advanced tools like Dita, DocBook, and Markdown, optimizing content across multiple platforms and use cases. Um, Hannah has driven product development. She's launched a UX content design practice. That's really interesting, and advocates for diversity and accessibility in tech. She actively mentors technical writers and content strategists, helping them to develop robust documentation and design practices. And she continues to share her industry insights through her Medium publication Content Strategy Adventures, which I will make sure that we have a link to in the show notes for you to look at. And so she's established herself as a thought leader in content strategy and design. And currently, Hannah is working for as a technical writer at Google. So thanks for joining us, Hannah. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Barb. I have to say before we get started that any opinions I give are mine and not necessarily reflecting of Google.
Yeah, have to put those disclaimers in there, definitely. All right, so today we're talking about building documentation teams, technical writing, and content strategy. So lots of stuff to talk about. Let's just kind of dive right into it. When you walk into a company with no real documentation function, what is the first thing you need to look for to kind of understand the situation?
Yeah, so first thing you really want to do is understand what they're currently doing, right? Anywhere, any company that exists is doing some kind of documentation already. So even if they don't have an official department, there's somebody that's out there writing, whether it's engineers writing content, whether it's marketing writing content, whether it's customer success writing one-off documents for their individual clients, etc. So it's about understanding like what they're currently doing, what tools they're using, and if they have any particular like needs right now, like what are they trying to achieve, right? Are they trying to scale? Are they adding in a new product line and they need to start documenting that product line? Do they want to revamp everything they've currently done? Do they feel what they have is not good enough? Like it just really definitely depends on each company.
Yeah, it's really kind of, there's no one size fits all, right? I guess that's kind of the story. And some people are deeper into it and more into it and know they want it, and others are harder to kind of, I think everybody realizes they need it. They're just not really sure what they need exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you convince them then that documentation isn't just a nice to have, but it's core infrastructure?
That's a really good question. You sent these questions in advance, and I've had some time to think about this. I think like by the time I get to a place, they've already decided they need better documentation. And having come in much more on the technical writing side, it looks a lot like, you have a business that's probably 3 or 4 years old. They've managed to get out some great products. They have some customers, and now they're getting to the point where their customers are asking for more information than they can give them just on the phone with support, or they don't have enough staff on customer success to get them set up, or professional services is like, we need better documentation in order to tell them how to do it, and we don't have the bandwidth to do that. So by the time they call me, it's like, hey, we have a problem, we need more documentation, we need some way to help our customers more, can you help us? And so it's not at all like a nice to have at that point. They're starting to realize that they need more. Another thing that tends to happen is just documentation that they have. Like maybe they started with a great like core set of documentation that somebody wrote. Maybe they left the company. Now they need that updated, or often like they have content that like they started one place and then they keep trying to update it, but then like somebody, they don't have a really good management of content, right? So somebody will send an email to somebody else with the latest version, and then they'll try to update that, but then nobody will know which one is updated. So these small problems like start to get really big when you have more and more and more people. So
Yeah.
but I would say in the beginning it's easy to say, I'm not a nice to have, I'm a must have, right? Because we're like, yes, we need you so much. But what's harder is as time goes on, later on, it's convincing people that you still need to be employed and you still are important. And that to me is the more tricky piece. And in my experience, how you deal with that is mostly relationships. If you are good at understanding people's motivations, like developing a relationship with them will help you understand what their motivations are. And if you're one of those wonderful gifted people, which I am not one of these people, but if you are a gifted person who can tell without even really talking to someone what really motivates them, then more power to you, because that's really going to be the most important piece, is being like, what is important, right? Is it making sure customers are satisfied? Is it making sure your own internal team is not overloaded? Is it sort of some blend of both of those things? Is it, the CEO just wants us to look really good for our next VC funding round? Like, it could be that, there's a lot of different pieces and motivations. But yeah, really understanding these relationships are really important. I think probably more than anything in the entire world is just knowing, having a connection with each leader in each function and really knowing what they need and what's important to them and how you can meet their needs, and then continuing to do that over and over again, and then socializing to them over and over again that, hey, I'm doing this thing, and here's all the things we're helping with, and here's what we've done, and here's how we've been able to add value, and how we've taken time off of your plate, and that kind of thing. So constantly showing and socializing how you are successful and what successes you've had.
You wouldn't think, it's a little funny for me that you wouldn't think that, especially if it's a software company that needs all this documentation for their customers, that it would be so hard necessarily for them to understand the value of really good quality technical documentation.
Yeah, and I don't think that it is hard, but I do think it, everyone can write to some extent, right? And of course with AI, that's bringing up a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at what the technical writer is doing and being like, well, that's easy. I can totally do that, right? We can just write our own documentation. And that's probably true to a point. But what's more nuanced about technical writing and is you're not just telling somebody how the product works, right? You're trying to understand their needs, and then how do I meet those needs, right? I need to know not just I have this great server out here, and you can, it's got this great RAM and this great memory or this great storage capacity, and it's got this much whatever. That's, who cares, right? It's how do I implement my software on my server or this server, or how do I connect these different network pieces, right? These are complex situations that you need that nuance to understand. You have to point people in the direction of what they need, not necessarily what you've created. It's a little more that's hardware, so it's a little less relevant, I guess. But if you're talking about software, for example, I see an early technical writer, for example, somebody early in their career, their tendency would be to write oh, here's the file menu, right? If we use a document, a doc tool, for example, your typical word processing, here's the file menu, here's the edit menu, here's the insert menu. No, I don't need to know these different menus. What I want to know is, how do I bold font, right? Or how do I insert a link, or how do I insert a table, or make this look this way, or whatever, right? I'm looking for more specific things. So that's where the technical writing nuance really becomes more important, is what are the goals the user is trying to achieve. And that's a lot harder to do when you don't have time and really ability to think through that and analyze that. And an engineer is often really and engineers are the ones who often get put in the position of having to write when there is no technical writer. Sometimes as a product manager, and a product manager can do it, but a product manager is usually very busy, and so they can explain it, and they're great at explaining it, but then to actually sit down and be able to write all that down, it takes time. And then to be able to proofread it and make sure it's actually meeting needs and it's as succinct as it can be, and all of that, that's more of a nuanced thing. So engineers, again, going to be more focused on the tactical, this is what it can do, and then the product manager still can talk about what it is to you, but you need somebody in that middle piece where they're really talking about the specific, this is how you meet the needs.
Yeah, I will be honest, I never really thought of it at that level, kind of linking it more past. Yeah, I kind of probably would have thought too, here's your file menu, here are these things, and not more of the user story or the use cases and writing stuff for that. So that's kind of cool. That's never really thought about it that way. Okay, so if you had to, we talked about this, if you had to stand up a documentation practice in 90 days, and you were just yeah, that's not going to happen. So what would your process be if you had to go in and, people, process, technology, how would you kind of go about doing it?
If somebody told me I had 90 days to help them with something, in their documentation needs. I would probably, okay, so it's not enough time to hire a team and get them up to speed. It's probably enough time to revamp a process to some extent, but you want to make sure you're setting people up for success. So you don't want to introduce a new tool and then try to train everybody on a tool in 90 days, unless maybe you have like 2 people total that are in the company or something. But
Yeah.
in most companies, that's not the case. So in my focus would be on that is like, what are your main goals? What are you using now? What are you doing now? And who's doing it, right? So figuring out how can we maximize this time to give you the best outcome, right? So if their challenge at the moment is we have way too much content, we don't know what's important, then it would be, we could use AI to filter through that and figure out what's important. We could look at metrics to see what's the most, used, and we could try to flesh that out. We could try to make a process more streamlined, make it easier for the people who are already doing documentation to do it, using their existing tools as much as possible, using existing processes as much as possible. 90 days isn't a lot of time to train everybody, but it's enough time to, I think, like look at what you have holistically and try to make a good plan for how to move forward in the future, and then institute a new process and push that process forward just a little bit. It gives you just enough time maybe to do a quick proof of concept, like, oh, okay, maybe you're using Word, right? Microsoft Word, and maybe you need to, create PDFs. So, or maybe you need web stuff and PDFs, right? So you can figure out a good process that will, here's how you document it. Maybe you add something to their Jira, a little flag that says this needs documentation. Maybe there's some way you can automate pulling out a release note from the Jira ticket so that the release notes are kind of automated, and then somebody just has to review them at the end. So there's small things that you can do to insert an existing process, an existing tool set to help people be able to make better documentation for their end users. And that's what I would focus on is how can we maximize that, and what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then, if possible, creating some kind of roadmap for improvement in the future, right? Small incremental changes that they can do on their own without needing me or someone else in that professional capacity.
Have you ever been in situations where you've kind of put a process in place or something that was kind of considered a best practice and it just didn't work out? Like what are the best practices kind of in things that you've learned along the way that, yes, we should always try to do that. This one doesn't always fit. We should think about this before we go in that direction.
Whew, that is an excellent question, and one is big. Yeah, it's hard to answer that directly. I think a few things. So the one thing I always worry about is because when I was early in my career and ambitious, and as many people are, right? I was like, I want to make a name for myself. I want to implement insert X shiny object, right?
Mhm.
DITA, DocBook, Docs as code, Markdown, whatever. Like, I want to do this thing. I want to make a stamp. I want to learn how to do it, right? And most of the technical writers I meet are super smart, super thoughtful people. They may be smarter than me. I don't know, probably a lot. Because maybe they don't do this, but I want to save those who are like myself, who are wanting to chase the shiny object, because I have definitely done that. And every time I have tried to chase a shiny object, like, let's implement DITA because it's the cool new thing, not let's implement DITA because it's the right thing for this organization. That's
Right.
when we get into trouble. Yeah, okay, so best practices, man. I would say, okay, so can you go back and ask the question, actually?
Um, yeah. So, what are some of the best practices that you should do every time, and what are the things that maybe it's considered a best practice, but how do you know it fits? Like, do things fit always all the time, or there's kind of situational?
Yeah, so I would say every time, my number one lesson learned from all of my non-successes, let's say, my learning experiences, would be understand what people are doing now. Never assume that the person before you was not smart. Always assume they are smart and they had a problem that they knew about that you don't know about yet. And your job is to uncover those problems, whatever they were, that kept them from being able to be any better than you think they should have been, right? Whatever that is. So this goes back to, again, like young, ambitious Hannah trying to make sure she gets everything perfect and wonderful, right? Somebody else was doing this before you. What did they learn from this before? What are they doing? So one would be not making an assumption about the previous person or people. Maybe they didn't have enough experience, maybe they did, maybe they didn't have the right tool set, maybe they did. You don't know. So best practice is understanding exactly what they are doing and why they're doing it, and trying to uncover those problems that the previous person had. And I would say, don't move forward with new things until you clearly understand as much as possible that. Now, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time, so you have to just move forward with what you have, but you will uncover those problems one way or another. So just kind of making space for those is really critical. Another really important thing to do correctly, or to do every time, is to just make sure you are clear about what it is you need from other people and how exactly that's going to fit into their process. So one main thing I do every single time I go into any documentation department is I look at what are your engineers doing today as far as tracking their work, right? Is there a roadmap that they're working from? Are there JIRA tickets they're working from? Like, how do I keep up with that? And then how do they help me stay up to date on that, right? So one thing I do is I'll add a field to a JIRA ticket, for example, of like needs documentation, yes or no, or needs a release note, yes or no, or like release note field, for example, is one that I've done a few times, and then have engineers just populate that field, and then we'll take it, automate it into a long list, and then copy paste that into something else after editing or whatever. So that's one way. It's lightweight for the engineers, right? They don't have to do much. They just have to go into that field and either click yes or no, or they have to write a small blurb, yes or no. Now they can just tell AI to do it. Probably it's very simple. You could probably create a small like AI prompt within your ticket system that like will literally populate that field with the best guess, and then have the engineer review it. So I mean, at this point, there's a lot of tools to even make that process more lightweight than when I was doing it a few years ago. And I would say just making sure you are super, super clear on their process, so you can just make your small change and then tell them what that change is, and making sure they know it and they can do it, and then that you continue reiterating it. The hardest part of that is policing it afterwards, where you have to be like, excuse me, Mr. Engineer, excuse me, Miss Software Engineer, could you please add that release notes data in there, right? That's the trickiest part. So making mostly it's saving people from themselves, right? Like, I don't want to go into the JIRA ticket, and I don't want to do this extra step, and so it's trying to continuously police that, and teach people that process, and then remind them of the process, and continue, etc. ad nauseum.
I would assume that maybe after a while they'd get into it and it would become habitual for them, like, to do that, but yeah, not at first.
Right, exactly. And what the goal would be for them to tell each other, hey, don't forget about that thing for documentation, right? And that takes the process and time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What about from a management perspective, how do they kind of measure the impact of the documentation, and how do they kind of communicate that impact so that everybody realizes, yeah, there's a reason we're doing this, and this is the outcome of it?
Yes, exactly. That's one thing I didn't mention, but I do think that would be another best practice I would absolutely encourage dramatically, would be find out how you can gather metrics immediately. If you don't have Google Analytics or whatever equivalent tool in your content, external facing content, like, get it right away, figure out how to implement that, because you want to know how people are using your content. So there's a few different reasons for why, right? So the metrics that you care about as a technical writer or as a content person would be, who's looking at my content? Are they finding what they need? Are they spending a lot of time on one page? And is that because they can't understand my page, or is that because they are really working hard on this process and my page is very helpful, and so they need to be on that page for a while? So trying to suss that out, maybe working with UX as a thought partner, and that can be really useful. But then there's the management side, and management wants to know dollars, right? So how much time of the engineers did you save, right? Engineers are highly paid. They're paid more than technical writers and content professionals typically. Mm-hmm. And how did I save their time? How did I save the company money by saving time, right? Now, each engineer used to spend an hour on documentation commenting or, compiling comments, once a week, to make like good API documentation. So now I've taken that off their plate. So now I've saved everybody once 1 hour a week, and I've made it better. And now we can see the customers are using it more, and we have like customer satisfaction be the next one, right? So you've got support, and now support calls have decreased in this one specific area. So because we've been focusing on this documentation. So it's about incremental progress. The one thing I would also tell my past self, if we're going to go there, which apparently I am, is is make sure that you do this incrementally, right? So it's great to have a big ambitious plan.
Yeah.
But in one particular case, I went in and I changed. So in 90 days, actually, this is how I know this is not possible. I tried to learn their processes, tried to change their tool, tried to write better content, tried to publish better content, and tried to do it for multiple releases all at the same time. Now, I did achieve that in 90 days, but the maintenance overhead of that was problematic, because when the 90 days was up, then I was like, oh no, now I have to maintain an entire process, tool system, doc set, maybe multiple doc sets in this case. And it's like, that's actually a lot for one person. Even if I was going to hire a team, it was going to take time for them to come up to speed. So it was very important to like both have a grand vision, but then also very minutely break that into small pieces, right? So what would have been better would be, here's this one area like user management. That's a hard area. We're really struggling with user management. Okay, we're going to focus on user management. And we know this because support calls and user management are our number one top problem. Okay, so I'm going to focus on docs on user management. We focus on the docs, right? Then 3 months later, like 1 month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, what is the impact on that, right? And now you can see, pilot project 1 with user management, when we focused on this and we wrote this was the outcome, and look at how much more satisfaction we have, right? And you can potentially, in some cases, really tie that to dollars. So, like, oh, well, because of our user management process increasing, we've actually gained more customers or whatever it is, right? So being able to show those direct lines is really, really important.
Yeah, it's funny. And I've done a lot of kind of customer stories of people implementing CCMSs. And I always kind of ask that question, like, or how are you measuring? And a lot of them don't measure. And I always find that's really fascinating. Like, you should be measuring, to prove the value of the work that you're doing. And it's always back, almost always to, your customers can use it easier, or your internal team uses it easier, or, your support tickets go down, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, these are just like the low-hanging fruit, right? I had another company that I worked at had customer success that was writing a really, I think I alluded to this earlier, where there was somebody sending an email to somebody else, and they had like a document, and then they'd modify the document and send that to somebody else, and now there's 14 different documents, because people just do this all the time, right? 10 different people did this. You have so many documents, nobody knows what's the right single source of truth. It was an easy low-hanging fruit to be able to say, well, customer success spent 10 hours a week on this, and you had like 5 different customer success people doing 10 hours a week. That's 50 hours, and I'm only working 40 hours a week, so we just cut that from like 5 people 50 hours down to 40, I mean, at a minimum. And that's not to say nothing of like reuse, if I did reuse, so to say nothing of streamlining any publication or any of that, right? All of this is time savings, and so critical. And especially if you're moving from one tool to another, because the investment, and like say if you're going from like Word to Dita, the investment to do that is extremely large. It's 2 years probably minimum to really get like your system in place, to train everyone, and then to eventually realize that ROI. A company is going to have to be like, yeah, no, I'm totally fine with you guys investing all this money right now to do something that will totally save us money later, right? Like, that is a hard sell, but you gotta prove that metric, or else you're just going to get thrown out. Like, it's critical.
Yeah, no, I understand completely. Oh, okay, let's kind of not switch gears, but let's go down a level deeper and talk about content strategy versus technical writing, and how in a lot of companies that I've understood, they're two separate things, even though they're related, but they're separate. Like, how do you deal kind of with that?
Yeah, so I'll talk for just a moment about the landscape of content and technical writing and content strategy. So about, let's see, late 90s, early 2000s, I'm not sure content strategy was really a thing outside of thinking about it like the structure of content, right? So Anne Rockley wrote a book called Content Strategy, which is mostly related to technical writing, content strategy, and like creating a content strategy for creating content.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few years after that, Christina Halvorson published a book also called Content Strategy. And this was more on that marketing side, but hers is more considered like what we consider content strategy today. And it is an umbrella term that encompasses 4 different pieces. She has a quadrant, and I can make sure you have that for your show notes. But there's editorial, so writing and editing, that's the technical writing piece. Structure, which is where do I put stuff? Process, which is how do we write the content? How do we produce the content? How do we do that? And then experience, focusing on the user, what they need, and then analyzing that. So content strategy somewhat encompasses all of that. And if I was thinking about it from like a career point of view, a technical writer would be somebody, or I would say, hey, young person who's interested in this field, technical writing is going to be for you if you really enjoy being curious, learning about technology, and then writing. But emphasis on that writing piece. Like you really are going to want to write. If you're much more interested in like structure, like how is content organized? How do we maximize that for users to be able to understand and like get what they need as fast as possible and get in and out? That's much more on that content strategy side. That's more about like the user experience and the structure. And I would say that's where a content strategist is going to be useful. And when I'm thinking also too, just as a caveat about content strategy, I'm thinking about content strategy from much more of like a tactical point of view and not specifically a marketing one. Because sometimes there's also the marketing content strategy, which is more about like how do you have a plan in social media messaging and your website messaging and other things. Also important, but not strictly what I'm talking about in this sense. This would be more like in your website, how do you get people to go to where you want them to go, right? How do you get them to the call to action? That's like a little bit more. But these are all blending a bit, right? So you've got, I'd say the marketing side is pretty distinct in my mind, and it's kind of separate from this other technical piece. So in that way, they're not really blending, but there is this one piece of content strategy on the marketing side, which is more website focused, more like how getting people information focused. And that's where I think it starts to marry the technical writing sort of content strategy piece. Also, too, content strategy has been used as an umbrella term to talk about UX content design, which is the small words inside an app or the software you're using, right? So if you're in your app and you've got a button that's like, take me out of the, like you have a confirmation, right? And it'll be like continue or okay or cancel, like which one is it? That's the people who are deciding which word that is are the UX content designers, but that has also been called content strategy as well. So sometimes those get a bit mixed up.
I understand that they're separate, obviously, because I work in marketing, so I know they're separate. But I think it's interesting that where marketing is supposed to be taking over more of the full customer life cycle, why they wouldn't want to pull more of that technical content strategy, technical writing into the fold, because it is a big part of the website today. It is very critical to have that content up there, not just as a list of how to do this, but maybe there's other ways you could leverage all of that technical documentation, right? So I always wonder why they don't try to figure that out. And maybe there are some out there that are, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the goals are really different. And I think that has a lot to do with it, because on the marketing side, your goal is to bring in business, to capture business, to get attention, to, just bring people in, right? Which is a different goal than I'm already in and I want to use and I want to improve and I want to do better. So I think one of the things that I do think is it's extremely important to align on your content standards, right? So if I go into a company, they don't have a technical writing department, they don't have any content strategy people, I go and find the marketing people as fast as possible and say, okay, how are you guys doing this? What's your style guide? Like, what are you using? Like, what are your terms? What are your branding things? Like, what are we approved to say? What are we not approved to say? That kind of thing. Yeah. So as partners, very, very, very helpful.
That's a really great idea. I never even would have even thought of doing that. So that's a great idea. All right. When you're kind of looking back, because you've been in technical writing for quite a long time, like what parts do you think have changed a lot and what hasn't changed?
Sure. So when I started my career in the early 2000s, we technical writing, well, okay, this was before UX. So before UX, technical writing was, I like to call it a band-aid because you'd have, a monolithic software being created by somebody like, we're going to create this giant software piece and then we're going to deliver it to everybody. And then they're going to love it and use it. And that worked for many companies for a long time.
Yeah.
And technical writers would be really the only people who saw the software from beginning to end and tried to use it as a customer before support and customer success and professional services and all that would have to implement it, right? So you say there's a feature and you see it from beginning to end, we see the whole implementation, and then we have to write about it, right? So we would come in as a way to fix what wasn't already done in a user interface. And then in UX design came out, a few years after that, which was, thank God for that, because then it was like, hey, you guys, if you're going to be writing software, you're going to want people to use it. And the easier it is to use, then, the better. And you need fewer technical writers because now it's not like, well, how do I create a user, right? What is this file menu for? Like, that's actually when you were asking, like, what is a file menu and why do I need it? And what do I do with it, right?
Yeah.
UX comes along and is like, no, make it intuitive, right? Oh, okay, make it intuitive. And then it's sort of shifted, technical writing shifted from more of that consumer and business to just enterprise software. And now you've got much more complicated concepts. So now technical writing has gone from being more of a consumer-based in business to being pretty much strictly business, SaaS, B2B, almost exclusively. Like, just to use an example, right? If your Snapchat app requires a manual, you're not using Snapchat. Full stop, right? So, if you need to implement Google Cloud Platform on your hardware, like, that's not intuitive and it can never be. It just can't. Like, it's just not possible. So I see technical writing moving much more technical. Another thing that I noticed a few years ago was API documentation becoming kind of critical. I was seeing advertisements for jobs for technical writers just being API writer, API writer, API writer, API writer. And now I don't know if that's going away with AI, but I would expect it to, because that is one of the things that has been possible to automate for many years by using comments. Now, it's not helpfulness being more questionable, but sometimes good enough is good enough. So that piece being a little bit more difficult to hire for or retain. And I would love to hear from any of your audience members who disagrees and has an opinion about that, because that's one area that I'm not that familiar with as far as how that's changing in landscape. I saw it kind of going up as more job descriptions being asked for that. And then now I'm not sure I'm seeing it as much as I was.
Yeah. So that's a good kind of point. How is AI kind of impacting technical writers and technical documentation teams? Obviously, it has an impact. But are we seeing or going to see the same situation as we see with content marketing writers, that the tools are taking over their jobs kind of thing? Are we going to see that on the technical writing side?
I'm not sure I am that familiar with what's going on with the marketing. Can you give me a quick high level what's being content
there's
marketing?
a lot of organizations now are saying, well, I can get these AI writers in, these AI writing tools, and I can give it a prompt and it'll go out and it'll write my blogs. And that's where we're getting all that. Everybody's talking about the AI writing slop, right? That's kind
Yes.
of the big discussion now in marketing, is everybody's just getting the AIs to write their content for them. And so my question would be, well, if the AI can do it for marketing content, can it do it? Can it take over the job of the technical writer and do it for technical content as well? Or is there another way that you think AI is better used in a technical documentation team?
Right. Okay. My understanding with marketing is that marketers have just been asked to do more and more and more with less and less and less. That's the way it was described to me, like maybe 5 to 10 years ago. So, I'm sure it's gotten much, much worse now with AI. I would say there is some risk of that in technical writing, but it's also hard to say because I am at Google, and Google, while is pushing hard AI, right? And we've got great tools, And we've got super smart people who are constantly like finding new ways to use these tools and then telling everybody how to use them, right? So I feel like I'm on the cutting edge. And what I'm seeing is, you know, AI is good at things that like where processes could have been automated already. AI is helpful in continuing to like move that forward. So when I was talking about Jira tickets, for example, right, AI could insert text in a ticket that sort of started that, right? So a start with AI, I think, is definitely possible. And I'm guessing with marketing content, it's probably similar too, right? You don't just like have AI write the blog and then say, sounds good, publish. You have to edit it and finesse it because it's, again, the slop, right? You're getting very eloquent, very wonderful sounding slop.
Yes. Depends on the company.
Fair enough. But I think AI seems to be right now, and of course this is changing constantly, but right now it's really good at checking links. It's good at editing content, editing code. If you have like markdown content and your content isn't building, for example, that's really helpful. I have a process I'm working on right now where I have Gemini CLI automating a release notes process that, while not difficult, just is error prone. So filling in the gaps where humans might have created lots of errors because, you know, technology is much more accurate when it's given the right context. And it's also really helpful in distilling complex information. So if I'm given a new product or feature to write about and it's a lot of technical jargon, you know, it's good to be like, hey, AI, can you tell me what this is saying, just high level, right? So I can start, oh, okay, it's about this. Oh, okay, I don't have to go through and read it myself to find that information. I can have a sort of a head start. What I do find is I don't think we're at risk of AI fully doing technical writing jobs yet, because like I talked about earlier, there's the what the product is that people like to write about, and then there's well, okay, I don't remember what the other parts was that I said, but in the middle, like awesome. Oh, but in the middle, like, is the nuance, right? Where you know, this is how you use this product. This is how you do this thing you're trying to do. So that nuance is still human based and it's not going to be easily ascertained by AI, right? You might, if you have a great metrics tool that AI can glean data from and make insights from, then maybe it can start to understand how to like structure content and start to see what's there and what's not there. But we have a ways to go before we can really make sure it's accounting for the nuances. And it's not great when it's given incomplete information or problematic information, which is often the case, you know, if you're, you know, and not always, but like, you know, when you're writing a spec, for example, like for engineering or whatever, or a PRD or whatever it is, if somebody just happened to leave out some piece of it, or they didn't write out something, they made an assumption that you already knew a whole big section of this information because you're, you know, you're an engineer, it's written for an engineer, and, you know, we expect you to know this, then it's maybe going to produce, again, very eloquent slop. And it's not really going to account for the fact that like, oh, we already expected you to know this, or, you know, so we have some ways to go. I don't feel like it's going to take over my job immediately, but I do think it will certainly change it dramatically by giving us more head starts and making us being technical writers, do more with less, similar to how it's changing.
I like your perspective, and I mean, always a human's always going to be in the loop, kind of phrase, which I guess everybody's using that phrase these days. But you kind of always need someone to make sure that everything is coming out the right way and is accurate.
Right. I mean, AI, so I was telling my children this, right? Because I'm like, okay, you guys don't actually know how code works. Because with code, if you write one character off, nothing works. The entire thing breaks, right? That's a lot of pressure when you're, you know, in a fast moving tech world, right? I got to fix one thing, but what is the one thing, right? So AI can help you find that thing, great. But what AI does do is it allows you not to have to be so precise, right? Now I can say, I want you to do this thing with this thing with this thing, and you can use human language, and you don't have to know the exact tiny details. And if you have one character off, you're not screwed and it won't do things, right? AI can actually understand, oh, you meant love, not live. Okay, right? And it can fill in those gaps. So that's one thing I think is really beneficial about it. And it now enables a lot of us to do like automated things we can do work, which is cool.
Yeah, I am. I'm always trying to think of different ways you can leverage it to do different things. Okay. We're kind of coming down to the last questions. And so, what is one process change that tends to have kind of an outside impact on keeping content current?
All right. Well, if we're talking about keeping content current with today, like right this minute, as far as, hey, there's a new thing and I want it to be written about, then keeping you informed, a process that keeps you informed is the biggest change and best change you could make. So whether that's Jira ticket flag, reports, data, anything at all that will help you stay on top of what you have and making sure you've got the most recent information. The harder problem to solve, and the one I have never ever solved, and I haven't seen anyone solve it well. So if somebody on here has a way to solve this problem, I'd be so happy. Is how do you keep old content up to date? Content governance, oh my goodness, is a hard problem to solve. And I really, really wish I had the answer.
Yeah, that's when I'm actually hoping to get someone on the podcast to talk, because that's something I've never talked to anyone about before, but I know it's a huge issue, and there's so many different pieces to it to think about that I think it would be a good topic to cover.
Agree. I mean, the best way I've seen it is literally a spreadsheet, right? I have all this content, here's my spreadsheet, and then here's the last time it was updated. You could also like draw that from analytics data or, your own internal systems, but
Yeah.
going through and having some kind of systematic, like, look through the logs, and once it's a year old, make sure you review it and then check with an engineer, right? It's still pretty manual.
Yeah. All right. What's one best practice in technical writing that you really kind of secretly think is overrated?
Ah. um Oof, man, that's a really good one. I'm just gonna say I don't think they're like, I would say, because there's not a one size fits all, and because I have made the mistake of following the shiny object in the past, I would say just be careful if that best practice is really a best practice for you. Because following what people are like, oh, Ditto's the new best practice. Ooh, Docs as code is the new best practice. I mean,
Yeah.
it might be. These might be for you, maybe, but just, yeah, no. Evaluate your own particular situation. Not one size fits all.
Yeah. It's a really good conversation, Hannah. I did learn some really good, interesting things that I'm going to try to take back to some of the stuff that I work on. I do have one kind of last question. It's kind of funny or fun. You call yourself the pink-haired content strategist. What makes you do? Obviously, you have pink hair, but what makes you say that?
Oh man, let's see. How did I come up with pink hair? Well, okay, so I had pink hair and I was unemployed, and I was like, I need a moniker of some kind. So I'm going to call myself the pink haired content strategist. And then I did. And then about the three people in the world who know me as that, like started calling me it. And I was like, oh no, I feel awkward about it. But then they're like, we love the branding. You got to do it. You got to do it. So I just kind of stuck with it. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I can never, ever get rid of this pink hair or change out of content strategy.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think it's really cool. Yeah. So thank you very much. I appreciate your being my first guest of our eighth season. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And thank you to Ingenix and Discover CX, who are the sponsors of the Content Matters podcast. Ingenix helps companies make content easier to create, manage, and deliver so customers can find the answers they need. Excuse me, Discover CX is built for teams that need to deliver customer portals, help docs, and customer success sites. They're all about writing content once, reusing everywhere, pulling together content from different sources, and then publishing multi-channel. And they have built-in XML authoring, AI, customer portal, and headless content delivery. Everything you need to keep your content clear, consistent, and easy to find. A modern way to deliver customer experience. You can check out discovercx.com or ingenix.com. Those are the websites where they have their products, and you can learn more about them. And while you're there, you can sign up for their newsletter, where we kind of keep you up to date through the newsletter on what's going on in the podcast and sharing other lots of great content that But at least I think it's really good content. But yeah, so check those out. And thank you very much. So thank you, Hannah. It was really great to have you today. And thanks everyone for watching.